brought you something.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
Which is that I brought you a copy. I brought you the UK copy of the book because it has a much cooler cover.
Oh,
than
I'll
the
say
US.
it does. It's reminiscent of Beowulf.
Yeah.
It's a boar's face on a woman's
head,
face.
yeah.
Tell me more about that.
I think they were thinking about how there's a lot of animal research in there.
Yeah.
And also just thinking about, like, in what ways are we animals? You know, in what ways are morality connected to the animal world?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent them a whole mood board, and my U.S. publisher was like, all of these look like novels or poetry collections.
Yeah.
It doesn't read science nonfiction. And then my UK editor was like, let's go.
Let's party.
Let's do something weird.
Yeah, what are the differences, the known differences in like how UK publishing and the US publishing differs?
I don't think I know because this is my first rodeo
the English
with
are
that.
so fascinating, aren't they?
Yes. Well, I think they're darker and twistier and more repressed.
Because yes, exactly. The repression begats more perversion.
I totally agree. It's a Freudian analysis of the British culture, but I believe that.
You sneak in.
I'm so
sorry.
sneaky.
Hi, hello. It's so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you.
Thank you for inviting me. This is such a surreal treat.
So let's start. Did you just fly in from Austin?
I did last night.
You teach at UT, right?
I teach at UT.
Okay. Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to Furman University, which is,
Did you
have you
miss
heard of that?
I have. My friend's mom went to Furman.
Oh, yeah. Back when it was Baptist, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a small liberal arts school in Greenville, South Carolina. And it was a Baptist college until, I think, like 1995.
All right.
And then I started in 1999. I'm dating myself here. So it still was, you know, private, Southern, still very Southern Baptist in its inclination.
But you were evangelical, so how does that jive with being Baptist? Did your parents worry?
No, it was it was sort of the general kind of Protestant, conservative fundamentalists.
Yeah.
So it wasn't culturally very different than my upbringing.
Okay.
And they give a lot of scholarship money away. So I actually wanted to go to Vanderbilt because I loved Nashville. But I didn't get the full ride, and Furman paid for me to go.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's how I ended up at
What
Furman.
part of Texas did you grow up in?
I grew up in Memphis, actually.
Oh, you grew up in Memphis.
Yeah.
Oh, you just live in I got confused.
I live in Texas. My dad was a Top Gun pilot.
Oh.
So we moved around when I was little.
Okay.
And then he worked for FedEx, and FedEx is in Memphis.
Were you suburbs of Memphis?
Yeah, like deep exurbs of Collierville. Are you?
I lived in Collierville for 2 years.
Are you serious?
I did.
That's wild. How did you end up in Collierville?
It was second and third grade. My dad got a job there, and so we went there. My brother was born there, and then we left. My mom
Collierville
hated
Elementary
it.
School? Did you go to public school?
She hated it. I went to, I think it was probably called Miss Zeman.
That's
Are you there?
amazing.
Hello,
That's such a
Lisa.
niche cultural overlap.
Yes.
That's wild.
This episode of Armchair Expert is presented by Apple TV, the new U.S. home of Formula One. Starting March 7th, you can watch complete all-access live coverage of every Grand Prix, including practice, qualifying, and sprints, all in one place. Watch every race live only on Apple TV.
I remember our house was like, compared to the house we had just come from, felt like a mansion.
Oh, yeah.
Big upgrade.
Oh my God.
Because you can buy so much. Where were you coming from?
I was coming from Georgia.
Okay.
And it was a small little house, and this felt like a huge house. I mean, I want to like go now because I'm
to
sure
see
it's
it
just
as an
like,
adult.
Yeah.
You
but
could
it was so
Zillow
exciting.
it if you remember your address.
I should Zillow it.
But it's an upscale area. I was just at a either a Sprouts or a food or doesn't matter.
grocery
Remember,
store.
I did a stop outside of Memphis, and one of the gals who was visiting said, "This is where this is where Monica lived."
Oh, I didn't know. You
That's
didn't tell
wild.
me that.
It's kind of nice, right?
Yeah, we moved there in like the mid 80s. So it was very, very small. It was still its own town. And I think my parents were getting out of the military, transitioning to a job, and they wanted a house where they could, raise kids. And so they bought out in Collierville.
Yeah. So funny.
Okay, so you graduated from there, and did you do graduate school somewhere?
Yes. So then I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville for my PhD, which was lovely. I mean, Charlottesville, I don't know if you've been, is a lovely place.
Yes.
And a lovely place to be a graduate student because you can live there even though you are below the poverty line.
Yeah.
You know, I think I made $12,000 a year when I was a graduate student, and I still lived there, and I was very happy.
And the college was famously designed by Jefferson, or
so UVA was Jefferson's academical village, and so he designed the rotunda, which is this kind of Palladian architecture in the middle of campus, and there's still kind of his original architecture down the mall. And then you see from certain places in town, Monticello. You can.
Cool.
So it's very Jeffersonianly inflected. It has a kind of pomp to it because of that. Yeah.
Okay, and you got your PhD in?
Clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology. And I guess what's the transition from that to then teaching at UT? Did you have stops in other places?
So I had an unusual path that I went to my faculty job almost immediately after graduate school. So in order to get a PhD in clinical psych, you do the research part of the graduate work and you do a dissertation, but then you also have to do a year-long clinical internship, which is in a hospital or a VA or a university counseling center. It's all direct patient hours, and that gets you the PhD in clinical psychology. So I had this 1 year in Boston where I worked at McLean Hospital, which is outside of Boston and Belmont. It's where, have you seen or read Girl Interrupted?
Oh.
Susanna Kaysen. That's McLean. So it's kind of this storied place in American psychiatric history. So it was this strange year of my life where I went from doing a lot of research and a little clinical work to 1 year full-time inpatient psychiatry, eating disorders, psychotic disorders, personality disorders.
Wow, so intense.
So this hospital, McLean, what reputation is it? Like where everyone would show up? Is it that kind of? Is it more private upscale?
It's a private. It looks in some ways like a college campus, and then there are these tunnels that connect the buildings, and they put all the graduate interns in the tunnels. That's where your office is. If you've ever seen the Angelina Jolie movie, there's a lot of scenes in the tunnels, and those do exist. But it is a private hospital, and so you get this interesting mix of people who just ended up there because that's where they went, and people who went there because that's where MIT will refer graduate students if they're having a first psychotic episode.
Okay.
Or people who come from old money in Boston.
Yeah, like are there any people going there to rest? That kind of vibe?
No, it's really hard to go to a psychiatric hospital to rest. No.
Well, rest is in quotes. Like they would say they're going away to rest, but really they're having a psychotic episode.
The bar's probably pretty. You got to be showing some real
you still have to be. I mean, even self-pay patients, which are a very privileged minority, there still is. I mean, and this is true of psychiatric hospitals in every country, every city in America, which is the need is so much higher than the number of beds that you really have to be at a level of functioning that's pretty impaired in order to be staying kind of residential or inpatient in a psychiatric hospital.
And did you have any kind of awakening during that clinical work where your interest shifted or you thought you were going to do one thing, but this experience clinically changed you, or?
Yes and no. So I knew when I was a college student that I wanted to be a scientist and I wanted to be a professor. And that was my goal. So I knew even on internship that I wasn't going to stay in full-time clinical care, that I was going to pivot, try to get a faculty job, start a lab. My primary life activity professionally was going to be doing science. I think what working in an inpatient facility impresses upon you is that psychiatry is not a solved problem. Like there's still a level of distress and impairment that no amount of money and no amount of resources and no amount of being the high functioning Harvard grad student or MIT graduate student can get you out of.
Yeah.
And so part of my clinical work was in case management, which is, okay, now when someone's leaving hospital, where are they going?
What's the
like who are they living
plan?
with? Like how is going to make sure that they can get to appointments? How are their medication going to be filled? And even for people with resources, that is an incredibly difficult thing to manage. So just as like a lived experience in bad systems hurt us all, even the most privileged among us. It was kind of a radicalizing experience to work in that situation.
Well, it could be a bit, it could make you quite pessimistic, I think, that experience.
I think it can, but then you also see people who get better, or even if they don't get healed, like there's no healing. You're not going to become not schizophrenic. You're not going to not have bipolar disorder anymore. And that doesn't mean that there isn't ways to help make your life better and less distressed today. So this kind of ruthless pragmatism of we can't make your brain different totally, but we can make you less distressed in this moment about these hallucinations that you're having.
I guess you would just have, variable goals as opposed to like an oncologist is like, we must beat the cancer. That's the signal of success.
There's that line, which is hope is a discipline. And I do think that working with the most seriously impaired patients in a hospital setting make you realize that what you're not hoping for miracles. You're not hoping for overnight transformation. You're having a discipline of like, what can we do today, given our tools and resources, to make tomorrow better? And I think that is a perspective that I think I've carried into my adult life.
Okay, so your current lab at UT deals with development.
Yes.
And so how do we get into that as our focus?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. So my first job in science when I was an undergrad at Furman was a research assistant in a mouse lab. So they studied opioid addiction and withdrawal, and I loved it. I mean, it was my first job in science. My previous jobs had been waitress in a diner, like retail shop girl. And I wasn't good at any of them. And then now I just thought, this is amazing, you know? So when I was deciding on graduate school, I wanted to stay thinking about genetics, thinking about the brain, thinking about addiction, antisocial behavior, but not in mice. I didn't want to work with rodents anymore. So I ended up in a clinical psychology program, which is about those same problems, but in people. And then I went to McLean, where I worked with some people who were recovering from substance use disorder, some people with serious mental illness. But I had this one rotation on an eating disorders unit, which was all adolescent girls. And that really solidified my interest in adolescence as this incredibly important period in the lifespan. So then when I started my lab at UT, it was really, how do I pull all of this together? So we're looking at genes, we're looking at the brain, we're looking at addictive behaviors, but how they begin in late childhood and adolescence, and what's the kind of nature and nurture of those things. So I was trying to pull together those different threads into one research program.
And would you agree, like from 98, did you say when you started college?
I started in 99.
99 till now, even that statement, nature versus nurture, this kind of then was kind of an ironclad dichotomy, which now no one who's hip to it thinks those are different things in a lot of different ways, which we'll explore. I want to go back to the lab work you were doing on the opioid. I think what's might be interesting, because your book is very unique, Original Sin. It's very memoir and academic. There's a lot going on in it. The professor who you were working under, she herself was a recovering cocaine addict.
Yes.
And do you think her kind of openness about that liberated you for the rest of your life and being a kind of fully, not a presentational professor, but someone, no, I'm a whole person. I'm not going to pretend I'm not otherwise.
So what's so fascinating is that I didn't know that when I was a research assistant. She hadn't disclosed that to me. I learned that later when I was no longer a student. And then she wrote a memoir of her own. It's called Never Enough. It's very good by Judith Grisel. And how she changed me was how she showed up in the world and in her work every day. So I came from this relatively religiously fundamentalist household, and many of the women that I knew growing up were primarily mothers, stay-at-home moms, didn't work outside of the labor force, didn't work outside the home. And so I just hadn't seen many adult women who were running labs and doing research and being
this is
professors.
a big departure.
Yeah.
And so I happened to get this research assistant job with her as an 18-year-old, like new baby adult.
Yeah.
And I remember she came to the lab the first morning and she was late because it was such a beautiful morning. She decided to bike. And then she was like, and now and she just had this freedom of how she showed up in her everyday life.
She sounds attic-y already.
That really made me be like, what is this? Like, what is
Who
this
is this
person?
lady?
Who is this lady? And so I worked for her, and then I took a biopsychology class where for our final, she would just give us names of drugs, and we had to draw where in the brain and what neurochemical systems they were. Yeah. And so I really learned this very intellectual approach to understanding addiction from someone who had lived experience, but I didn't know that at the time. Yeah. And then when I finally got to know her a little bit as a person later on, I was like, no wonder I thought you were so cool when I was 18.
I think I would imagine it would also be helpful to, prior to that, I'm sure what you learned in your day-to-day life as a kid in Memphis in an evangelical home is like, addiction is a failure of willpower and morality. It's a character flaw. Whereas this laboratory was demonstrating, when you give these mice opiates, their brains immediately adapt, requiring a larger dosage. They are absolutely incapable of not becoming addicted to it because that's how the thing functions in their head. Like, I think that would have been very illuminating as far as like what you had been told versus what you're witnessing.
It's totally paradigm shifting. I think that if you're raised and you think that drug use is a sin and that the answer to sin is prayer, personal relationship with Jesus Christ, atonement, punishment, that addicts deserve to be punished in order to punish the sin out of them, which, as we know, that's not very effective. And on the one hand, all of those things can be very powerful for people who want to change their lives. Yeah. A spiritual practice, a relationship to a higher power. And at the same time, that's not the whole story. Addiction doesn't exist on some metaphysical plane that's free-floating away from our bodies and our brains.
Yeah.
And it's also not even a uniquely human phenomenon. And so I think to go from a very moralizing perspective on addiction to understanding it as a natural phenomenon, this is something that we can make happen in mice.
Yeah.
And this is something that we can manipulate in mice by injecting things into their brains. Yeah. That is a fundamentally different way of seeing the relationship between the body and behavior, and also a different perspective on what needs to be done if you don't want people to be addicted to opioids, Right. It offers a new lens of a path forward.
Yeah.
When you were like coming home and talking to your parents about the things you were learning and stuff, how did that go?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't have very clear memories of this, except for 2 interactions that I had with family members when I told them, this isn't a passing phase. I'm going to go to I'm my senior year of college. I'm going to go to graduate school. I really want to make psychology and genetics and science my life. And one of my family members said, I think psychology keeps people from Jesus. Mm-hmm. Another one said, I was afraid you were going to say that. Uh-huh. So there really was a sense of this way of seeing the world and this endeavor is dissonant, maybe in ways that we haven't fully articulated to ourselves, maybe couldn't necessarily fully articulate to you from our worldview. And I do think psychology is kind of a radical science. I mean, you were an anthropologist. Mm. Anthropology, if you study it, you see the world differently for the rest of your life. You know?
Absolutely.
And I think psychology does the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I teach intro psych at UT, and we introduce it as psych is the scientific study of the mind, brain, and behavior. And if you just think about that as a phrase, the scientific study of the mind and behavior, it really is a paradigm that changes the way that you see the world and can be inconsistent with how other people see behavior, especially bad behavior.
Yeah, blame.
Yes. When you're in a blaming mindset, you're in this, judge's mindset, then everything that you see is filtered through that lens.
Yeah.
And that prevents you from seeing
or disgust.
clearly.
Like that's a very powerful one too.
Disgust too.
Okay, so your book starts off you about to take a trip with your boyfriend to go do LSD in the desert in West Texas.
Yeah.
You're going to have your kids go to
My
Dad's
first
house
husband,
for the weekend. And we quickly learned that, you'd done LSD once before and that your boyfriend was like, let's not fuck till after. I mean, we're coming hard for a professor. I'm like, oh, this is already juicy and fun.
Yeah.
And then also just kind of brave. Like how do you get liberated to write? Like I admire it and I think it's fantastic. But you're also a professor. I'm like, does it cross your mind while you're writing? Like
100%.
Yeah, and you just
I have 1,000 students in my introsite class right now, and this is not usually the parts of my life that I share with them.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a couple things here. One is I wanted to write something that felt different on the page than many social scientists, psychologists, academic philosophers write. There's a lot of great nonfiction that are written by other professors, and those books can be awesome.
Yeah.
And also there is a kind of continuity of tone and voice across them. And as a writer, I kind of just wanted to see if I could pull something off that was a little bit different.
I love it. You're starting off, as we already talked about, is a kind of what we might call a recovering Christian. Right? And so you have a lot of your own stuff going on. Yeah. So tell us about the acid trip and how it kind of informed you to write this.
The other thing is, the book is the book is called Original Sin. And that name, that phrase, original sin, we get from Augustine, Saint Augustine in the church, who came up with this idea that Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and that original defiance of God is inherited over generation to generation, such that what you inherit could not just predispose you, but actually condemn you, damn you, make it inevitable that you're going to behave in ways that are amoral or immoral.
To the degree that his conclusion was, yes, infants are sinful.
Infants are sinful. Infants deserve to go to hell. And that thing that you inherited, even though it wasn't your fault, it's your burden. It doesn't get you off the hook, right? It doesn't make you less damnable. It makes you more damnable. Yeah. And that theme, that idea, I think is carried through now, even if we're not Christian, even if we were never raised in that tradition, even if we've never heard of Augustine, I think we live in a culture that's shaped by these ideas about what does it mean to have a body that seems sometimes at odds with what you want that body to do, and what does it mean to be morally responsible to each other, if we're, have cells and we have amygdala, and we can also study that from the perspective of scientists. There's a content warning to those of you who don't like scripture being quoted, but there's this line in the Bible book Romans, Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul writes, "The things I don't want to do, I keep on doing, and the things I do want to do, I don't do." And I think that captures such a fundamental human experience. The things I don't want to do, I keep on doing.
Yeah.
So we can think about, why do humans do things that they don't want to do? That's a fundamental problem. And we can come at that from an objective perspective, as scientists, as philosophers, as scholars. But the reason why that question is pressing is because we all have lived that experience internally. We have a subjective experience.
Anyone who's looked in a food pantry has experienced that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, there's what I should do and there's what I want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to write a book that is about this tension between the objective and the subjective, and only have the objective perspective in there, and not have any of the well, what is it like to be a person
it's
that wants
inherent
things
in the
that are
topic.
messy?
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, Augustine's most famous book is his Confessions. It's a memoir. And I thought, well, if he can do it and that can be a book of ideas, like why can't we have a memoir that's also a serious book of ideas? So that was my goal.
And his intellectual adversary was, how do you say?
I think it's Pelagius, but some people say Pelagius.
So Pelagius was coming at from the opposite point of view, and this was a grand debate in Christianity.
This is the grand debate. So I went to Christian school my whole life, and no one ever told me that the doctrine of original sin, this idea that you inherit Adam's sin, is something that was invented 400 years after the birth of Christ. So we have had, at this point, centuries of Christians who understand a relationship between the body and morality. And then Augustine comes along and is like, actually, no, like you inherit sin, you inherit physically. Like that's why he was so anti-sex, as he thought, well, there's no possibility of having good sex because every time you procreate, you physically pass on this.
You transmit
it to the next generation. And his big adversary, Pelagius, was like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, so they're from opposite ends of the British Empire. Pelagius is British, Augustine is from North Africa. And Pelagius says, if something is inherited, it can't be sin. It's either nature or it's morality.
Yeah, the framing is if it's nature, that's not choice.
Yeah.
And only choice is sinful,
it had to be an act of will in order to be sin. And if you think about this dynamic of someone saying you inherit a body that's bad and your nature just makes you more punishable, or if something is in the body nature, then it's not an act of will, it's not morality, we can't hold each other morally responsible for it at all.
Yeah.
You see that dynamic everywhere in contemporary culture. Like literally every conversation we have about weight, about sex, about drugs, about addiction, you see these two perspectives. And they don't say, I'm taking this, I'm siding with this 3rd, 4th, 5th century church father when they do it. It's secularized. So I think it's interesting to think about how did those ideas still influence how we respond to the science? And also, like, is there another option?
Well, I was just going to say.
Exactly.
Why are we stuck with the only two options that were given to us nearly 2 millennia ago at this point?
Well, and I think when people hear those two options laid out, they will be drawn to one or the other. And I think what is interesting is you go through different examples, I will guarantee that you will flip-flop a lot. At first, I would go, no, that's horseshit. Right?
Yeah.
So that's my knee jerk.
Yeah.
But then weirdly, as we understand behavior and genetics' role in behavior, again, on a big spectrum, that's also true. We do inherit things.
Yeah.
Now, whether I'm going to label them sin or not is not really relevant. But lo and behold, no, you are kind of, you do inherit quite a bit.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with your will or choice. And so in some weird ways, we do inherit
That's
sin.
not positive to you.
Yeah.
That can be negative.
As we'll uncover, as you start to uncover.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Apple TV, the new U.S. home of Formula One. You can now watch complete all-access live coverage of every Grand Prix, including practice, qualifying, and sprints, all in one place. I will be consuming all of those things, Monica.
I know you will.
I kill for Friday to start watching practice 1, following, and then on a sprint weekend, oh my gosh, 2 races. And this season brings a ton of new energy to the sport. New teams like Cadillac and Audi just joining the grid. New drivers stepping into major seats. Lando Norris defending his first World Drivers' Championship. And all eyes on Lewis Hamilton in his 2nd season with Ferrari and a brand new circuit in Madrid. Plus, a new U.S. home for Formula One. You can watch every race live only on Apple TV. Watch on Apple devices, Android devices, smart TVs, streaming devices, gaming consoles, or on the web at tv.apple.com. All part of one Apple TV subscription alongside hundreds of exclusive shows and movies. Watch the Formula One Japanese Grand Prix live on Sunday, March 29th at 1 a.m. Eastern, or watch race replays on demand anytime only on Apple TV, the new U.S. home of F1. We are supported by Allstate. Checking Allstate first could save you hundreds on car insurance. That's smart. Not checking the pockets of your jeans before doing laundry? Classic oversight. That mystery clunking in the dryer? Yeah, that was your lip balm's final moments. And somehow there's always one random receipt in there to dissolve into confetti. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Potential savings vary, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate North America Insurance Co. and affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois. We are supported by Intuit TurboTax. April 15th is coming up fast. And if you're like most people, you're probably dreading the whole tax thing. You know the old way, sitting in some waiting room for hours or sending over your tax docs and waiting for any kind of update. You want something modern and tech forward, but you also want that human connection. And this year brings a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can walk into a tech-enabled TurboTax location near you and meet face-to-face with a real tax expert. Drop off your documents in the store and see them uploaded to your TurboTax app instantly. Just like that, you're done. Your new TurboTax expert stays back and works tirelessly to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. Honestly, it feels like someone finally figured out what we've all been wanting. It's not some sterile tax office from 1987, and it's not just an app where you're on your own. It's both. The human expertise with smart modern tech. You drop off your stuff, go about your day, and get real-time updates as your expert works through everything. That's the upgrade. Head to TurboTax.com to find a store location near you and get matched with a TurboTax expert with real-time updates and iOS app. But let's go back to the acid trip because you have you're having a lovely time, and Travis. Okay, now he's your husband.
Yeah, we
okay,
got
great.
married.
Okay, congratulations. Yeah. But Travis has a terrible trip.
He does.
Oh, no.
And he is caught in a hallucination where he has crashed the car, he has killed you, and he is to blame.
Yes, it was awful.
Yeah. I've been with someone on a terrible trip.
That's horrible. But you were also tripping?
And I was also, and I had come out of it a little bit, but you know, if you're still tripping a little bit, you're not the best companion if someone's having a very bad trip.
God.
You know, there's a contagion there. And so I think there's several things about this story. One is, this is a reason why you should not do psychedelic drugs unless you have really trusted people to process the experience afterward with. Just as like, I don't necessarily say that in the book so explicitly, but you know, this turned into a piece of art in terms of the book and growth for him, in part because he could talk about it with me and his friends and his parents and his therapist, and like we could really integrate that into our experience.
Yes.
So I think we're learning more and more that psychedelics can be really powerful tools for growth and discovery, but it's not just like a insert drug, output growth. Like there needs to be needs to be some processing and like human interaction and attachment that helps you make that experience coherent and learn from it. But it was this horrific time in which he was absolutely convinced that he had done something wrong. Mm-hmm. He was absolutely convinced that there was no way he could have not done it every time the loop was played. And he was absolutely convinced that he was totally guilty of doing it, that he was totally, on the hook for this action. And so it was, in so many ways, the lived experience of this Christian doctrine of original sin, which is there's no way for this to have gone any other way, and you are 100% damnable. You're guilty for doing it.
Yes.
And I didn't know this at the time. My mind wasn't going like, okay, I understand why this experience is so intellectually and personally meaningful to me. Like, it's his trip. Like, why am I writing about it? And it took a while to really articulate what does this experience have to teach me? Why can I not forget about this?
Yeah.
And that was the connection. It was, that in that moment, that felt so true. This thing that I've completely dismissed as like a relic of my Christian childhood. Is it true? Are we on the hook for things that we can't change? What does it mean to be on the hook for things we can't change? And that's where the book goes from there.
Yeah, I think it opens the door to a really compelling thought process, which is blame in itself. Like you give the example of Oedipus, who has sex with his mom and kills his father, and then gouges his own eyes out.
Yes.
And he gouges his own eyes out even though he's not to blame. He didn't know. So now there's also this juicy debate about, is blame relevant if the person had no idea? And there are schools of thought that yes, they are, and there are schools that thought no. So yeah, like let's talk about blame a little bit.
So complicated.
So blame, just what is blame? Like part of blame is an emotion, right? Like blame is this feeling of I'm outraged and I'm entitled to be outraged, or I'm resentful and I'm entitled to be resentful because you've done something that violates some moral norm, some social norm, some legal norm. The philosopher Peter Strawson, who's working in the middle of the 20th century, called this the reactive attitudes, and basically argued, I think convincingly, that there is no human life without other people mattering to you in a way that makes you sometimes really pissed off at them because they have hurt you in some way. So the blame is this idea of like, I am entitled to have these reactive attitudes to you. I'm even entitled maybe to make you suffer or want other people to make you suffer because you've done this bad thing. Part of the journey that I took in writing this book, I actually wrote this book. I wrote a draft of it and I sent it to my editor. And she was like, this book reads like you figured out what you were thinking as you were writing it. So now that you figured that out, can you please rewrite it?
Interesting.
So then I took it apart and I had to rewrite it. And so part of my journey in this book is really thinking about what is the difference between blame and accountability, right? And I think blame is like, you've done something bad, you're bad, I'm entitled to treat you like you're bad, I'm entitled to feel outrage and resentment at you. Does accountability have to be that? And that was a big kind of intellectual growth and personal growth for me over writing the book, is kind of trying to pull those ideas apart in my brain.
Because on one hand, we think that blame is warranted when a decision was an option, was present.
Yeah.
And you picked one or the other.
Yeah.
And you picked wrong, so you deserve blame.
Yeah.
But we are very forgiving if you had no choice, you weren't aware of a choice. We don't seem to blame there. But then back to the biblical framing, if you sin, regardless of you knew it was a sin or not, it's a sin.
You're still blameworthy.
Yeah, so it's like we already have kind of two radically
There's a lot of
opposed.
different ideas that we can realize are contradictory in our collective sort of cultural unconscious that are pulling on our intuitions in different ways.
I think we should maybe attempt to define sin as we'll be using it.
Yeah. So I think we can define sin in two different ways. I think it's been defined in two different ways in church history, and then also it corresponds to these kind of two different notions of blame that we've been talking about. So one is sin is doing something that you ought not to have done. So there is some rule in your society that's a moral rule, that's a legal rule, that's a social rule that says thou ought not kill someone, thou ought not have sex with someone that's not your spouse, and you do it anyway. And usually breaking rules comes with some sort of censure or punishment.
And it has to be an active choice or no?
And it just has to be an act.
Okay,
like, either way.
You say your favorite definition of it is from Francis Spofford?
Yes.
Definition, uppercase sin is the human propensity to fuck things up. It's our active inclination to break stuff. Stuff here includes moods, promises, relationships we care about, and our own well-being and other people's.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lovely thing for us to think about.
And I think it gets to, one, it's not just like there's some authority that's telling you what not to do. When you violate a norm, you're hurting people. Often you're hurting people you care about or people who care about you. And so that tendency to fuck up your relationships because you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing because the rule is there to protect the relationship or to protect the community. I think that's a really good way to think about sin. I think what's interesting about that definition is he says it's the tendency to do that. And I think this is where we can kind of have two definitions of sin. Is sin the action, the doing it, or is sin the tendency to do it, which could be governed by all sorts of things? And I think in the Augustine tradition of you inherit sin, you're not inheriting doing something, you're inheriting a tendency
the want to
do something. When you're thinking about, are you to blame for what you've done, and then the choice comes in. But sometimes we blame people for even wanting to do something, for being prone to do something.
We've even had criminal cases where someone was thinking about cannibalism and that became a court case. Where do we draw this? Where do we delineate between thinking of something and Okay, so that's all of your kind of personal journey, but then your professional journey which predates this book, which is heavily involved in the book, is that you publish a paper that talks about a certain aggregate of genes that you have discovered that overlap with really increased outcomes of addiction, aggressive behavior, eating disorders, sexual promiscuity, a whole bevy of different behaviors that seem to be linked by some grouping of genes.
Yes. So my lab is in what the field is known as behavioral and psychiatric genetics. So what we're interested in doing is discovering certain parts of the genome, certain parts of your DNA sequence that differ between people that increase your likelihood of developing a certain mental disorder, mental illness, and or behaving in a certain way. And this is a method, kind of a general enterprise that is shared across lots of labs, across lots of countries, most of whom have nothing to do with anything like that we would consider moral behavior. And the way these studies work is you're basically getting DNA from huge numbers of people.
Millions
of people.
God bless the Scandinavians, right? Let's give them a shout out. They have kind of public...
Iceland, UK Biobank, which is in the UK, and then 23andMe customers. So it's a lot of people that are white British 60-year-olds who've spit into a tube and given the British government so much information about their lives.
And also in Scandinavia, though, their medical records are public, although obscured. The identity is obscured, but it's all public. So you can do these enormous epidemiological studies.
And they link across medical records, criminal legal system involvement records.
They don't do that in China?
Well, if they do, they're not
give the data
they're not sharing.
Yeah.
They're not sharing, but they're probably doing it.
But how they infamously debunked these vaccine autism connection claims was they were able to look at a group of 3 million kids who had been vaccinated and then a million that had not, and they could immediately show there's no difference.
There's no difference there.
So that's where it's like this huge benefit.
You have these huge data sets, and you're basically going through and you're saying, where do people differ in their DNA? And are those differences correlated with whatever behavior that I'm interested in? So what we were really interested in my group was what's known as conduct disorder, which is this diagnosis that's given to children if they are persistently breaking rules, aggressing against other people, maybe aggressing against animals. And there just wasn't the data on that in enough people. So our strategy was basically to say, what other behaviors do we think are caused by the same genes because of family studies, because of adoption studies, for which we do have enough data on huge numbers of people. Let's pull as much data as we can on all these different behaviors and kind of triangulate across them to be like, what genes are associated with all of them. So we were looking at ADHD symptoms in childhood. We were looking at sexual behavior, age at first sexual intercourse, and number of sexual partners. The UK Biobank, if you say that you've had more than 99 sexual partners it gives you a follow-up question, which is, are you sure?
Wow, that's very
really
cultural.
good.
Yeah.
Are you sure that you've had more than 99 sexual partners? Have you ever smoked pot? Have you ever smoked a cigarette? Are you engaged in problematic alcohol use? So you drink to the point that it's a problem in your life. And do you describe yourself as a risk taker? And none of these are serious antisocial behavior. Like having sex at a slightly younger age or like being a little bit more hyperactive.
Yeah.
None of that is, most people wouldn't even consider that necessarily sinful behavior.
Right.
But what all those things have in common is someone in our society, maybe not your group, but someone in our society thinks that's bad behavior. And you did it anyways. Like you had sex even though, you know, in 1960s England, it maybe wasn't that
These are like
acceptable.
misdemeanor sins.
Misdemeanor. That's a great word. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that if you identify genes that are associated with these misdemeanors, that are consistently associated with all of them, you end up with a set of genes that also literally predict felonies.
Oh, wow.
Like literally predict your likelihood of ever being arrested, of ever pulling a knife or gun on someone, of engaging in much more serious antisocial behavior. It also predicts if you've ever attempted suicide. So it also predicts kind of this harmful disinhibition against the self.
Yeah, and in this paper, you established that this group, the people who share this cluster of genes, are twice as likely to be arrested.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty significant finding.
Exactly.
And I'll add, too, it's not the case of like 1 in 1 million versus 2 in 1 million. This is like 20% versus 40%.
40%.
Yeah.
Yes,
So this is
exactly.
like,
Many Americans have a lot of interactions with the criminal legal system.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's not destiny, right? It's not 100%. It's not all genetic. Like, this probably goes without saying, but no geneticist believes really in genetic determinism. Like, this is not a set of genes that fate you to be arrested, but it is a very significant increase in risk, and it's a significant increase in your risk of developing an addictive disorder, too.
Yeah.
And this is tricky to think through. How should this information, if at all, affect our judgments of the moral blameworthiness and the legal responsibility that are attached ordinarily to these behaviors?
Well, I think the adoption studies are really interesting. That's another great resource, right, to establish a genetic predisposition to some of this behavior. So tell us about what we discovered.
Yeah. So again, this is, thank goodness for the Northern European countries that have these registries. Although there are some good adoption studies in the United States too. My colleague Janae Niederheiser runs one of them. So what you're looking at is children who've been given up for adoption at birth or very near birth and raised by adoptive parents in a closed adoption where they're not having contact with the biological parent. And does the characteristic of the biological mother or father, or both, predict something about the child's outcome regardless of the adoptive parent that they were?
This is a very clean nature versus nurture
very
study.
clear.
Yeah.
And what these studies show you is that it's always nature and nurture. So if you're adopted into a family where they have substance use problems, you're more likely to have substance use problems. But if your biological parents were addicted to substances or had ever committed a violent crime, then you are more likely to develop those same things.
3 times more likely.
Even if you never met them, even if you're raised by other people. And those odds ratios can change. You know, and for some things it's as high as 3. For sometimes it's like 1.5 times more likely.
Yeah.
But it's still, these are people that you've never met, that never raised you. And it still is affecting your behavior.
I like this line. Adopted children who never live with their biological parents are 3 times more likely to abuse drugs if biological parents abuse drugs. Identical twins are similar in their drug abuse as they are in their body mass index or coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, isn't that telling?
Yeah. So there was a great paper published in 2015 by Tinka Polderman in Nature Genetics where they looked at 50 years of twin studies and aggregating across all of those twins, how similar are identical twins, how similar are fraternal twins. And what psychiatric traits look like, they look almost identical to cardiovascular traits.
Yeah.
And that, I think, I find that a really interesting comparison for our intuitions, because we are now so used to thinking, well, of course your body weight is nature, of course it's nurture, of course it's gene-environment interactions, of course you have some agency, but like also a limited amount of it, at least that's your experience of it. And like your set point that you inherited from your parents that maybe got canalized really early in your life all make a difference. We can do that so easily when it comes to weight. And then, but why do we have such a hard time doing that with becoming addictive to alcohol
On a
or
sliding
drugs?
scale,
Yeah.
addiction, we can kind of get there.
Yeah.
Violence, we don't want.
We don't want to go.
We don't
want
let anyone off
any-
the hook for that.
Yes.
And I think because violence has a clear victim other than the person doing the behavior.
Yeah.
So addiction can hurt other people, but the primary victim is the person using.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so when we're asked to make sense of this science, and we tend towards a kind of Pelagianism of it's either biological, nature, or moral.
Yeah.
And we're asked to choose. When we're asked to choose for body weight, we can be like, okay, let's reclassify this as biological instead of moral. With addiction, there's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But then as soon as it's obviously a moral issue, because there's nothing that gets closer to the heart of what humans think immoral behavior is than hurting another person deliberately.
Yeah.
And then we're saying, okay, we're not going to be able to reclassify this as not moral. And also you have to take seriously that there's a biological element of it, but that doesn't mean that some people are born bad. Like that's such a mind fuck,
it's-
I
Yeah,
think, for
yeah,
Americans
yeah.
to keep all of that in their heads at the same time.
Yes.
Ugh.
But they're all a part of this
Yes.
aggregate of genes
They
you have
are.
identified.
Yes. I mean, and again, it's not just me. This is such a team science effort. My former graduate student just is an author on the paper that I just finished. And if he's listening to this, he's probably like, it was me doing all this stuff. I'm the one in the trenches. But I think a really great example is, just one gene, and one gene in isolation has a tiny effect, but I think it's illustrative anyway. It's this CADM2. It's a cell adhesion molecule gene. And if you look at what it's associated with having sex with more people and putting more salt in your food and smoking cigarettes and
I don't need to
becoming
take the
addicted
genetic
to alcohol.
test. I clearly have
and
this.
like, what is it associated with? It's associated with doing things that bring you short-term pleasure, but you might have a voice in the back of your head saying, it's not a good idea, right?
yeah.
And that have potential negative consequences. Yeah. And I think that really troubles our sense of who we are to think that a gene could be involved in that.
Our agency. It threatens our agency.
Why do I do the things I don't want to do?
But I think it would be a great time to educate people on, I think the colloquial understanding of genes is a little too simple, which is we like to think they found the gene, the BRCA gene.
Yeah.
And there are a handful of these genes, but there are 3 billion genes.
Well, there's probably not 3 billion genes.
Oh, okay. How many genes are there?
I think we're estimating there's 20,000 genes.
Oh my God.
No,
I'm sorry. There's 30.
Yeah. There's many
3
base
billion
pairs.
ACGT on the DNA strain.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Humans have way fewer genes than we thought that we were going to have.
Okay.
That was one of the big surprises of the Human Genome Project. It was like, we're so complex, we're going to have more genes than anyone. And it's like there's species of apples, I think, that have more genes than we do.
Okay.
And part of it is because there's a lot of our DNA sequence that used to be called junk DNA that regulates how the genes are read. And that seems to be where a lot of the action is in human uniqueness, is not what are the ingredients, but when are the ingredients combined? So yes, you're totally right. Like people think of the gene for nearly every psychological characteristic is what we call massively polygenic. So poly means many, genic gene, which means that it's influenced by thousands and thousands and thousands of genetic variants, of genetic differences between people that are scattered throughout the gene, hundreds of genes, maybe thousands of genes. And each of these genetic differences makes like the tiniest little bit of an influence.
Yeah.
So for height, there's not one gene for height unless you have like Marfan's or dwarfism. Most people are taller or shorter because you got 1,000 slightly height increasing genetic variants that increase your height by 1 millimeter. But you got so many of them that you ended up a tall person rather than a short person.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
In my first book that came out like 5 years ago, I write about this NBA player who happened to sit on a plane next to a geneticist. And the geneticist was like, "Why are you so tall? Like, you're 7.5 feet tall." And he was like, "I don't know." And so they genotyped him. And he didn't have any gigantism. There's no weird, rare
Smoking
thing
gun.
going on.
Yeah.
What it was is there's the gene that makes you 1 millimeter taller than, or a little bit taller than your siblings. And he just had 6 standard deviations above the mean in all of these tiny. So it was like, the genetic, if you're rolling the genetic or flipping the genetic coin, it just came up heads like 1,000 times in a row. And that's why he's so tall.
Right.
So everything we're talking about when we're talking about addiction potential or likelihood statistically to be arrested for a crime, there's no crime gene. There's no addiction gene. There's just like there's really no obesity gene. There's lots of genetic differences. And so there's a distribution. But then every distribution, there's someone who ends up on the tails of that distribution. And that's where we see really big differences in their likelihood of developing one of these disorders.
Is AI going to completely make these correlations come rapid pace? Like, you must be using AI to go through all this DNA info.
So one of the big challenges now is we can find genes, now that we have many people, more rapidly than we can figure out what the heck they're doing.
Yeah.
There's still ambiguity sometimes as to like which gene this genetic variant is, because it's like it's located next to this one and this one. Like, what do we know about that? And then how do these combine to affect protein, to affect cells in which part of the brain?
I guess in that it's a pattern recognition machine. I feel like they'll be coming hot and fast.
I think that I'm very low confidence about my predictions for AI because I feel like the whole field is moving more rapidly than I'm comfortable like prognosticating about. But it's done amazing things with like protein folding problems, which are also really complex. And so how is our knowledge of the genome and the sheer amount of data that's available, plus the advances in AI, where are we going to be in 10 years? Like, I think where we are now would have felt like science fiction 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
I'm hopeful that AI will be particularly helpful in this. Okay, we have a gene, and then we have an outcome 25 years later, which is being arrested. What the heck is that gene what is it doing in the body, in the brain?
Well, now would be a great time to introduce the fact that this group of genes you and your colleagues have identified are most active in utero.
Yes. Yeah. So there's this idea that you sometimes get in psychiatry that some disorders are neurodevelopmental disorders. So you'll hear that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder or schizophrenia is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And I'm always like, what makes something, what disorder is not neuro and not developmental?
Right.
Like everything is neurodevelopmental. And when we're looking at this collection of genes that predict misdemeanors, but also predict more serious antisocial offending and more serious substance use disorders, we can look with reference data sets and be like, okay, well, where in the body and when in development are these genes most turned on, most expressed? And it seems to be in the second and third trimesters of pregnancy. So in utero, prenatal development is when these genes are most specifically active. So that fits also with what we know from the animal literature on preterm birth, which disrupts brain development in utero, is associated with elevated risks of aggressive behavior in animals. Children who are born preterm are at elevated risk for ADHD and conduct problems. So there's something about pregnancy and your brain being grown when you're being cooked, right? That seems to be
So
really
much
important.
pressure.
And I think, again, the part of the reason that I think we struggle to make sense of this is we're so used to thinking about adult behaviors as choices. But the person doing that choosing was created by a developmental process that begins in utero, and that, all of the luck of who they came home to the hospital, from the hospital to, is there. But that genetic luck starts affecting their brain development even before they come home from the hospital.
And then we get into the juicy philosophical element of this, which is we have come to have appropriate toleration for someone with ADHD, for someone with autism, and these are neurodevelopmental conditions that started in utero. It would hold that we would have that same level of compassion and understanding for the other ones that developed in utero, which would be addiction and these other behaviors. But then philosophically, we have an interesting line between all of these.
Yes. People's intuitions about what does it mean if you can show that someone's behavior is linked to their early genetic and environmental luck. How should that affect how we treat them? Those intuitions are really unstable depending on what the behavior is. So if that behavior is weight, we're like, well, there's nothing wrong with being heavier or skinnier. If that behavior is sexual orientation, we're like, of course, like this is a difference between people. When it comes to addiction, I think we're kind of all over the place actually as a culture. But then as soon as there's harm to another person and there's violence, so they might have inherited a predisposition to violence, and that's supposed to make me more compassionate of them.
This is very Sapolsky determined, that book. And it's like, I was just thinking about this the other day. I think I'm a determinist. I really do.
Really? That's interesting.
Like,
Before you got in here, we were both saying we love Sapolsky, but we don't like determinism.
you don't? Knowing all this?
So this is, I don't know if I'm a determinist, like in the academic philosophy sense. So, the academic philosopher would say a determinist and an incompatibilist is someone who says everything we do is determined by causal factors. Our agency is an illusion, and having the freedom necessary for moral responsibility is incompatible with what we know about the determinist universe. I would say that I don't know if the universe is a determinist universe or not. That seems like a physics question that's like beyond my pay grade. And I don't know if we have free will in the way that a lot of philosophers. But I think that the practice of holding each other responsible is really baked into being human.
A social primate.
Yeah.
We're a social primate.
Yeah.
And so I think Sapolsky would carry it to, we're not free. So therefore, blame is never appropriate. Punishment is never appropriate. It's as useless to be mad at your husband who cheated on you as it is to be mad at the sky for raining. Whereas I don't know if we live in a determinist world. I don't know if we have free will, but we're all on this planet and we still have to make decisions about how we treat each other.
Yeah.
And I think holding each other accountable is not a supernatural condition, but a social one.
Do you want to hear my two arguments against
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Number one, I think because although I agree, we could look back in time at any behavior we observed, we could look back and we could know every single thing that added up to that behavior.
Yeah.
That is known. That is knowable. If we knew the location of every atom in the universe, we could see exactly why this effect occurred.
Yeah.
That gives you the illusion that we would somehow be able to predict what happens next.
And you think humans are...
But my argument is, until you can predict, until you have data, till you have scientifically proven a prediction's possible, bullshit, because just because you can see how things landed here does not mean you can look forward and predict the future, which would mean it's not deterministic. Secondly, we have this amazing dude on Neil Thies teaching us about self-organizing complex systems. And all self-organizing complex systems, of which we are one, they have to have divergence in them or they collapse. And divergence is innately non-deterministic. So there cannot be a system without divergence in it.
Yeah.
So those are my two arguments against.
So you're not a determinist, and I'm not a we need freedom in order to hold each other responsible. So we have two objections to Sapolsky.
I mean, I don't think, I'm not like I'm not like I'm determined to pick up this cup right now and now I'm doing that. It's not that everything's already decided, but it's easy for me, what I can recognize, it's easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, we have to keep that person accountable who behaved this way when I'm not behaving that way, even though I wasn't gonna behave that way.
You're not battling the desire.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and if I was given the exact same situation, genetics, I would be behaving that way.
Yeah.
Like it's not, no one's better than. And I don't know that we're making choices so much as like living out
a program or living out a process
that our genes have given
I think
us.
we're living out a very
tricky.
probabilistic situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a very high probability of doing certain things, which I agree with.
Yeah,
But
and I think that number's very high, actually.
For people who are listening who are already jumping to, well, no one's going to be held accountable. Well, I want to make clear about Sapolsky's argument, indetermined, and your argument as well, I think, by the time we get to the end of the book, is there is a huge difference between removing people who are dangerous from hurting other people. No one is arguing for no
just
accounting.
letting them go.
Correct.
Yes. The argument is you can take people and remove them from other people so that everyone's safe without blame and without hatred and without being punitive. Many of the people in this country, and in this book, it shocked me to read it, like 60% of Americans believe in hell. So if you believe in the notion of hell, 60% of us do, God believes you should be punished. So of course our criminal system should involve punishment and pain and suffering and atonement.
Yeah.
And so that's the division you and I think Monica would all like to see, which is like, yeah, probably you would have done the same thing in the same environment with the same genes. You're not better than anyone, so let's remove them and make everyone safe and make everyone accountable, but without any of the blame, hatred, and moral righteousness.
The hatred. I mean, I think in particular the sense of like, you've done this, and therefore you deserve to be scorned. You deserve to be exiled. I'm entitled to be elated and happy and feel pleasure at seeing you suffer.
Talk about that study you were talking about when people get shocked. And please walk us through that.
So ordinarily, most typically developing humans, they come in and they show empathy at another person's distress very early in life. Like if a baby hears another baby cry, they will start to cry. It's a really innately aversive thing to see a fellow human suffer. Again, we are a social primate.
Yeah.
So ordinarily, if you see another person being electrocuted, you see in the person who's observing that patterns of electrical activity in parts of the brain that ordinarily respond to being pained yourself, right? Like I'm feeling your pain.
Yeah.
Unless the person being shocked is first portrayed as being a wrongdoer in some way. They've violated a moral norm in some way.
And so they've hooked people's brain up to presumably an
They've seen it
fMRI, and they're going to watch
scanner.
someone get shocked.
Yeah.
And if it's a, quote, good guy that gets shocked, you're going to see empathy and discomfort and suffering.
And then if you see someone being hurt that was first portrayed as a wrongdoer, then you see brain activity that's more characteristic of pleasure. Dopaminergic areas.
Oh.
And that, I think, is telling us something. I think it's telling us multiple interesting things. The first is that why do we feel pleasure at certain activities? Why do we have dopamine when we have sex and eat sugar and drink water and interact with people who like us and experience ourselves being esteemed and watch someone else suffer. That's indicative of how evolutionarily old and necessary to the survival of humans, this consequences to violating the social rules is. And this is where I also, I think, differ from Sapolsky is I don't think we're going to reason ourselves out of that. Like, I think it's baked into the sauce. I think that telling people that they're going to lay aside their retributive urges is like people advocating for total sexual abstinence and like becoming a monk. Like, some people can do it, but like not most people. And it's going to go really against the grain of our nature. On the other side, like, all of our ingrained pleasures can be hijacked and we can feed them really empty calorie versions of it, right? It's like, I'm evolved to like sugar and someone can offer me Skittles and it's like highly packaged, look, all that.
Yes.
And I think a lot of our culture is basically like the empty calorie version of that retributive pleasure.
Well, again, we evolved to overconsume because when we found something in bloom, we were smart to overconsume, get some fat reserves because we would go long periods without. So now we live in a time of abundance where we have to imply morals on top of it.
Yes.
I felt this so acutely last week, and I was aware of it, right? I'm watching the new Game of Thrones show, A Night in the Seven Kingdoms.
Okay,
Have you watched
I have not,
it?
no.
Okay, but this is it. Did you watch the first Game of Thrones?
I did.
Okay, so then you've already experienced this in Game of Thrones, which is when the bad guy you've been hating, there's a battle scene, and there's a guy we fucking hate. And there was a moment where our hero was making the bad guy suffer, and we were watching it with two friends, and me and the other guy were going, let's go, boys! Like, the elation of make this motherfucker pay was so visceral. And I was aware of it. I'm like, look at this thing.
Yeah.
But then again, if you think evolutionarily, like, someone who is a threat to the group is a threat to the group. So if they are eliminated, there should be elation. The big threat to the group is gone.
Yeah. There's other studies where it's like, at what point in time will children pay tokens or give up stickers or pay their money in order to see someone who's been portrayed as taking a ball away from a child, see them hit with a club. And it's like, by the time they're, I think, 5, they're like, here are my stickers. I want to see, you pay to see that, you know, people pay to see those movies. They pay to see. So there is like, there's something so fundamental there with that retributive instinct. And then the question is, what do we do with that, right?
Yes.
Like, are we going to give ourselves all the Skittles we want because it feels really good? And so how do we recognize that has evolved for a reason? Exactly as you say, because we're social animals that are trying to enforce cooperative norms. There's no cooperative system that doesn't have enforcement.
Yeah.
Without leaning into that so that it's that primal retributive urge is the only thing that's like running the show. And if you have a theology that says justice is making people suffer eternally in torment in a lake of fire, and then you have this dopaminergic response to seeing your wrongdoer suffer, and you let both of those run the show,
Yes.
you know, I think you end up with what the system that we have now, which is not just how do we protect people from themselves so that they can't do any more harm? How do we protect other people from them? But how do we make them hurt maximally? And not everywhere in the world does that. We have examples of it being doing differently. And those are really instructive. And what if we keep the impulse behind the pleasure, which is we need to keep each other safe, without just doubling down on this like juice of retribution.
I agree with you. We're always going to have to step over our evolutionary bias. Like, we're going to have to constantly confront these things that were serving us at one time but now don't serve us, and we got to have tools in place. And I think that's weirdly the great tension of living in this modern world.
Yes, but also the great opportunity. I mean, I think that humans' superpower is our ability to flexibly decide how to live with each other. I mean, back to the anthropological perspective, there are so many different ways that we have ordered our lives and ordered what are we going to do about the fact that we are messy, imperfect people who have to live with other messy, imperfect people? There's a lot of ingenuity and creativity that I also think is baked into being human. And so that's really encouraging to like, okay, well, what is the reimagining that people are doing or that we could do around this?
Because our systems are aspirational, they're what we hope to act as a collective conscious.
Yes. Yeah.
They should be virtuous.
Yes.
You know, that's the point.
We can
of them.
aim to be better in our institutions than we are in our worst moments.
That's right. And so when we evaluate some of our current institutions, they're operating very, however you'd say.
Retributively.
And punitively.
I'm glad that you I also read things and I never hear them pronounced. And then I have to talk about the book and I'm like, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh, I want to talk about one other thing. Well, first of all, I would urge people to go watch, you gave a lecture to, I think it was at college. And it just was, I feel like, made directly for me because you break down Hank William Jr.'s family tradition.
Oh, Brain Bar. Yeah. It was like youth, it's like an ideas festival in Hungary. And there were so many young people there just going to hear talks. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. And in there, you talk about, again, to counter the determinist point of view, what an ingenious study. I can't believe they have the technology to do this, but they have done studies where they make a dozen genetically identical rats. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's so many different approaches to this where you're looking at genetically identical animals who are raised in identical conditions and then seeing, this is, I think, back to your fundamental unpredictability of complex systems. Mm-hmm. If you have the same nature and the same nurture, to the extent that we can measure, does that mean you're necessarily going to act in the exact same way?
Yeah, or will your behavior be identical?
Yeah, and the answer is no. Your behavior will be similar, but it won't be identical. So some of this is looking at inbred mice where they're, if they're basically in a controlled breeding population, they're all very, very genetically similar. There's also studies of armadillos, because armadillos always give birth to 4 identical quadruplet armadillos.
Wow.
And then there's what is known as clonal fish, who are genetically highly homogeneous. Uh-huh. And in all of these, I won't leave out this one. There's also studies of cloned pets. So in Texas, there was a study of, there was a couple that was very attached to their pet bull. And so they had him cloned, Chance and Second Chance. So all of these are genetically identical. So in all of these studies, you're looking at if you have the same genotype and if you were raised in a similar or identical environment, are you behaving in the exact same way? So Chance was a very, docile bull. Second Chance gored his owners, I think twice.
Maybe even more. When they were doing This American Life episode, they were interviewing him, I think, for the 3rd time in the hospital where he had been gored, the owner. And he said he's not giving up on them. But Chance is a little different because Chance came to them late.
Yes, and they don't know the initial environment.
But the rats, when you put them together, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so in this case, it's mice. And what they did is they have inbred mice, so they're all genetically very similar. And then they raise them in identical cages with identical food and identical handling, identical temperatures. And then at a certain point, they put them all together in these big mouse vivariums, and see what happens. And there's digital sensors everywhere so they can see, which mouse is moving where, when. And what you see is the emergence of mouse personality. Individual differences in which mice are dominating the exits and the access to food, which ones are moving around a lot, which ones are aggressing, which ones are very inhibited and don't want to come out when it's light. And you can explain it with genotype, and you can't explain it with the cages that they were raised in. There's a unpredictable individuality to behavior that's neither one of those. And there's no way at a certain point for humans to have the same environment because we are each other's environments. Like, as soon as they got in a social group, there was no way for every mouse to have the same thing because they had each other, and these just initial tiny differences in how that first interaction went.
Yeah.
And that could be initially chance, but then life builds on chance, right? Chance, there's a path dependence to those initial things. My colleague at UT also does these studies where he has mice in a vivarium, and they establish a dominance hierarchy, and then he plucks the alpha mouse out and sees the power scramble that happens. And one thing that makes the alpha mouse is he pisses everywhere. He's like constantly peeing all the time. And so you see immediately like genes involved in drinking water so that I can make pee, like get turned on within minutes of this.
Wow.
And so the plasticity of the nervous system to respond to social cues is amazing. And that's a mouse. Think about how much more complicated it is than a person. Sometimes what I tell my students is that if you're looking at a tapestry, if you're looking at a piece of fabric, like you would never ask which is more important, the threads that go this way or this way, right? They're woven together, and that is what constitutes the fabric.
Yeah.
It is nature and nurture being woven together. And the interface for that is often the epigenome that constitutes the developing person.
When we talk about like how we can maybe make some changes where we still have accountability, but maybe not this like really punitive nature behind it, don't you think in order to do that, everyone has to see this as an issue?
Yes.
And I don't think they do. I don't think people are upset that people are punitive. Some of us are, but I think people like that there's like...
Well, they were designed to, as we,
They love it.
Right. So like I don't see how to
That's such a good question. And honestly, I think it's such an important question now. I mean, I think what we're living through politically, where people are being hurt on the streets and then other people are cheering for it. Like, what is that other than identifying with the punisher, identifying with the person that's like, I'm bringing the pain, and then inventing a class of wrongdoers to justify it. And so that's such a good question. How I think we're used to thinking of their sins and then we get punished for our sins. But I've come to think of it as retribution can also be a sin, in that it is another really primitive aspect of our biology that gives us pleasure that we can indulge in and overindulge in and indulge in regardless of how much it's hurting other people. I wish I had a good answer for that question. Like, how do you convince people that it's a problem to want to hurt
other people or yourself?
Yeah.
Like, it's tough.
In that lecture, you were asked this, it turned over to the audience a bunch, and most people were along the same path. And I think probably a lot of people listening will have this thought, which is, okay, if we've identified this suite of genes and we're entering into an era where either gene editing is more realistic, perhaps the epigenome, they're erasing chunks of it in mice. You have... people who are about to do IVF can look at the embryo. I think people will be curious to know what you think about embracing these genes or wanting to eliminate these genes. I guess a eugenics
I have
question.
so many thoughts about this. I'm so glad you asked this question. Okay, so the first thing is going back to all of these behaviors are, in the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, massively polygenic. So they're influenced by thousands upon thousands of tiny genetic variants that have a tiny effect. And the implication of that for gene editing is that we're not going to be gene editing a 20th of your genome to make you slightly less risk-taking, right? So I think the applications for CRISPR-Cas9, which is our technology for gene editing, is going to be monogenic disorders. Like you have, sickle cell. Brenner syndrome is an example of serious antisocial behavior caused by one gene. And so I think the technological question that we're going to have to grapple with is not going to be gene editing. It's going to be genetic selection. And so that's a technique in which people create IVF embryos. They might do this because they have fertility challenges and they were going to do IVF anyways, but increasingly there's marketing doing this electively. So you could conceive the old-fashioned way, but you choose to conceive by creating a lot of IVF embryos. And then genetically testing those embryos for, there's what people already test embryos for. Is there an aneuploidy like Down syndrome or trisomy 18? Is there a monogenic disorder? And then looking at a polygenic score. So this would be your genetically predicted likelihood of that embryo eventually developing a substance use disorder or eventually scoring very highly on an IQ test. And this is not science fiction. Like there are ads on the New York subway right now that say, have your best baby.
Thanks.
And it is an ad for pre-implantation genetic testing of embryos. What I think is really important for people to know about this is, one, these genetic risk scores that we've developed, I've developed, other people have developed, they are not crystal balls. For the reasons we've been talking about, I can say that your probability of something is higher or lower, but that's totally different than, say, like Huntington's disease, where if you have this gene, you're going to get that disorder. So there's a uncertainty around the estimates that I don't think often comes through in the marketing for these techniques.
Yeah.
The second thing is the science is most applicable when it's applied to people who are genetically similar to the samples in the original research. And most of those people are Northern Europeans.
Right.
So anyone who comes from a different part of the globe, by virtue of having less genetic similarity to Norwegians or white British people from the UK, those estimates are going to work much less well, or maybe not at all. And there's no ads on the subway being like, have your best baby only if you're genetically similar to people from Northern Europe, right? Like that's not part of the advertisement around this. And then the third thing is genes don't do just one thing, right? They're involved in lots of things, and there's no gene for risk-taking. And I have this thought experiment in my book, and I say, imagine if we had some eugenic dictator and they said, no one gets to reproduce the old-fashioned way. Everyone's going to do IVF-created embryos, polygenic selection. And we are only going to select the embryos that have the least risk-taking genes. And we're going to repeat that so that in every generation, we are only getting the most inhibited, puritanical, not risk-taking, not likely to use substances. Is that, I mean, separate from a terrible, like, dystopian lack of freedom, like, do we actually want to live in a world in which no one has that?
Thank you. Your last point is the one that I believe in strongest, which is the nature of your study is we have criminal data, we have genetic data. We do not have data of overachieving, writing prowess. These are things that are hard to measure. So one that I love is like, I grew up learning dyslexia made you twice as likely to end up in jail. But over time, what we've learned is dyslexia also makes you 2 to 3 times more likely to be a CEO.
Yeah.
Addiction. How many of our writers are addicts? How many of our poets? How many of our musicians?
We have data on
We're
this.
only looking at the pathological side.
Yes.
This is the inherent problem with the DSM. Is like we've observed these pathologies, but we're not really shining a light on, well, what's the upside of it?
Yeah.
There might be more upside than there is downside. This is a trade-off situation. So we're coming up with, quote, normal, and we're going to lose all this diversity, and then you will have determinism.
I mean, variety is necessary to the richness of human experience. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. I mean, if you look at who is most likely to be a successful entrepreneur by the age of 30, we can see this in the data. It's people who have social privilege, white men from middle to upper income families, and then men who experimented with substances and had a little bit too much sex and like engaged in low-level delinquent behavior when they were teenagers, right? Yeah. And what is that? That's risk tolerance. And society needs people who are very aware of risks and potential negative consequences, but we also need people who are willing to go for it and are more risk tolerant. I mean, I think that everyone's strength can also be their weakness, but also everyone's weakness can also be their superpower.
I mean, there'll be no technological developments. There'll probably be no art. There will be so many things missing.
Freeze right here.
There's another study where they look at people who are very high on genetic risk scores for schizophrenia, which again, people can select against now in their embryos. If they're not patients with schizophrenia, they're more likely to be artists, they're more likely to be musicians, they're more likely to be in creative professions.
Oh God, that's so hard though.
Like if you think about a distribution and the top 1% is this, but this zone in the like 75th to 99th zone are the people who are having so much imagination and openness to new experience. Like, how can you say that gene is a good gene or a bad gene?
Right.
It's all of the above gene. Yeah. I have a chapter in my book about this. It's called Variety, and it ends with this observation from Durkheim, who's a founding sociologist. And he had a paper where he said, some level of crime is necessary to society because if a crimeless society is one in which everyone thinks about things exactly the same and no one has any differences in moral imagination. And if we look back in time, many of the people we now think of as moral pioneers were criminalized in their time. So how do we, I don't want to underplay, serious antisocial behavior has costs. It hurts people. But I don't think that we can then say, so let's get rid of the genes, that the people can do bad things, but that doesn't mean the genes are bad genes because those genes are doing many different things in the human body, and we need diversity. I mean, diversity is grist for evolution. There's no evolution without mutation.
Exactly.
There's no evolution without diversity.
Yeah, Galileo was a criminal. He was a criminal.
Socrates, Jesus.
A lot of criminals.
Gandhi.
Okay, Original Sin on the genetics of vice, the problem of blame, and the future of forgiveness. Radical book. I do applaud and love how personal and memoir-y it is.
Thank you for saying that.
In addition to being chock full of yummy scientific research.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
Everyone, check out Original Sin. I hope you'll come back when you have another book.
I would love
so
to.
interesting.
Thank you for having me. This was a delight, guys.
Oh, good.